The first time I found wedding confetti floating near my dock, I thought someone got a little too excited on a party boat. The second time, I found folding chairs lined up on the deck of my private boathouse like it was a chapel. That's when I knew something was off. I'm Camden Thorne. I work in marine engineering, which means I'm gone a lot, but when I'm home, I like peace, quiet, and my boathouse untouched. It's an old structure I restored myself: cedar siding, reinforced dock, and a perfect view of the sunrise over the water. It wasn't just a hobby project, it was personal. Our neighborhood has an HOA, of course, and it's run by a woman named Valerie Mayfield, who is every inch the stereotype frosted blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and the kind of voice that can cut through drywall. She appointed herself event coordinator of the HOA last year, which apparently gave her the divine right to micromanage every square inch of the lakefront. One Saturday morning, I came home early from a job in Charleston. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed cars parked all over the grass near the shoreline. Some even half-blocked my garage. I followed the noise down the slope toward the boathouse, and my jaw nearly hit the sand. A full-blown wedding was happening on my property. There were white folding chairs, an arch wrapped in fake ivy, a rented sound system, and a dozen people already seated. A bride stood on the deck in a lace gown, holding a bouquet. A guy in a suit was adjusting a mic. And there, standing next to a folding table covered in cupcakes and mason jars, was Valerie Mayfield, wearing a floral pantsuit and barking orders like she was directing a Broadway show. I shouted over the music. "What the hell is going on?" Valerie turned, annoyed. "Camden. You weren't supposed to be back until tomorrow," I stared. "You scheduled a wedding on my dock." "It's not a big deal," she said, waving a manicured hand. "The HOA approved it. I submitted the request myself. You weren't using it this weekend, and the couple made a generous donation to the beautification fund." I blinked. "You rented out my boathouse without telling me." She had the nerve to say, "Technically, it's part of the shared lakefront easement. As HOA chair, I can authorize community events." "You should read the bylaws." I pointed to the deed hanging inside the boathouse. "That's my private structure on my private parcel, not the HOA's, not shared, not communal, mine," she scoffed. "Don't be selfish, you barely use it anyway." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos: license plates, decorations, Valerie barking at a caterer. She tried to block the lens with her clipboard. "You're being dramatic, Camden. You should be thanking me. This brings exposure to the neighborhood." I took a deep breath. "You're trespassing. Every single person here is trespassing." She rolled her eyes and turned back to the crowd. "Don't mind him, everyone. He's just cranky." By the time the wedding officiant asked everyone to rise for the bride, I was already on the phone with the Coast Guard. The 2 Coast Guard patrol boats glided in silently from the far end of the lake, blue lights flashing low and steady under the midday sun. I stood by the edge of my dock, arms crossed, watching as the crowd of overdressed strangers slowly realized this wasn't part of the ceremony. The bride whispered something to the officiant. The groom turned pale. A few guests began to shuffle uncomfortably in their chairs. Valerie was still fussing with the cupcake table like nothing was happening, completely oblivious to the uniformed officers stepping off the first boat. "Afternoon," said the lead officer, a tall man with a stern jaw and a laminated ID clipped to his vest. "We received a report of unauthorized use of private shoreline facilities." "Name," one of the guests pointed at Valerie. "She's the one in charge." Valerie turned just in time to see the officer walking toward her. "Excuse me," she said, holding up a clipboard like a badge. "This is a sanctioned HOA event. Everything's been approved. You're disrupting a legally permitted ceremony." The officer didn't even blink. "Ma'am, we're going to need to see a copy of any legal permit that grants use of this dock for public events." She huffed. "You don't understand. I'm the chair of the Lakeside Ridge HOA. We have jurisdiction over this part of the lake." I stepped forward. "No, you don't. This dock, that boathouse, and the shoreline you're standing on are privately owned. I have the parcel map and deed upstairs. I'd be happy to show you. The second officer pulled out a handheld GPS unit. Already confirmed. This dock is outside the HOA's common access zone. It's registered to Mr. Camden Thorne. Valerie's expression contorted. He's lying. He's just trying to ruin this wedding. The bride, now visibly panicking, turned to me. Wait, so this isn't a public dock? No, I said. And you've all been misled. The groom stepped forward, tugging at his tie. We paid over $4,000 for this venue. She said it was a private event space managed by the neighborhood. The officer jotted something in his pad. Who accepted the payment? Valerie's lips quivered. That's irrelevant. The HOA, ma'am, the officer cut in. You're under investigation for unlawful commercial use of private property, misrepresentation of land ownership, and unauthorized event coordination without proper permits. Please remain where you are, she shrieked like someone had just stepped on her foot. This is harassment. I demand to speak to your superior. The first officer didn't flinch. You'll have that opportunity. For now, you're being detained pending further investigation. When they placed the cuffs on her, the crowd let out a collective gasp. A few guests stood up and started filming. Someone dropped a glass of champagne. Valerie's voice hit a pitch I didn't know was humanly possible. They're humiliating me in front of my neighbors. You're ruining everything, Camden. This is a vendetta. I turned to the bride and groom. I'm sorry you got caught in this. You're welcome to stay and take pictures if you want, but I'd recommend contacting your bank and disputing the payment. You've been defrauded. The groom nodded, his jaw clenched. Oh, we will, trust me. Back at the top of the slope, Valerie was loaded into the back of a squad car parked on the main road. Apparently, the local sheriff's office had been looped in by the Coast Guard the moment they confirmed the property boundaries. I followed the officers up, phone in hand, and showed them security footage from my boathouse's side camera. Valerie unlocking the door with a spare key from the HOA lockbox, placing folding chairs, directing vendors where to park. One clip even showed her pocketing cash from a man with a clipboard. The deputy nodded. That's enough to initiate a formal fraud investigation. We'll be forwarding this to the county prosecutor. By sunset, the dock was empty aside from a few left behind decorations. I sat on the edge with my dog, Jasper, watching the ripples fade as the last patrol boat disappeared beyond the bend. The next morning, I got a knock on my door. It was Darren, one of the quieter board members. Mid-50s, always wore Hawaiian shirts like he was on permanent vacation. He held a manila envelope and looked like he hadn't slept. Camden, he said, we need to talk. I stepped aside to let him in. He sat at the kitchen table, opened the envelope, and spread out a series of documents. She's been doing this for months, he said, pointing to a spreadsheet. Weddings, birthday parties, even a retirement thing back in March. Always claimed it was on common use property, but it was always your dock or the vacant lot across from the clubhouse. And no one questioned it, I asked. He looked ashamed. She told us she had the owner's permission. Said the paperwork was in the HOA files. We didn't think to verify. She steamrolled over anyone who asked too many questions. I picked up one of the receipts. It was a Venmo transaction from someone named M. Ortega to Val Mayfield Events. The memo line read, Final payment Lakeside venue. She was running a side business, I said. Looks like it, Darren admitted. Even created a fake business license under the HOA's name. We only found out because the treasurer tried to file taxes and saw income we never received. I leaned back. You're going to need a forensic accountant and probably a new board, he nodded slowly. We're calling an emergency meeting. I want you there. That night, the clubhouse was packed. More people than I'd ever seen at an HOA meeting. Word had spread fast. Phones buzzed with texts. Neighbors whispered in clumps, casting glances at the board table like it was a crime scene. Darren stood at the front. We have evidence that Valerie Mayfield used her position to conduct unauthorized commercial activities on private and HOA-managed property. She misled both the board and the community. We'll be holding a vote to remove her from all positions and initiate a full audit. He turned to me. Camden, would you like to speak? I stepped forward. This isn't about a wedding, it's about accountability. She violated property rights. She lied. She endangered the HOA's legal standing. And worst of all, she didn't care who got hurt as long as she looked important. A woman in the third row raised her hand. What happens now? Darren answered. We're working with the sheriff's office and the county attorney. There will be legal proceedings. In the meantime, we'll be appointing a temporary chair and suspending all event planning until further notice. A man near the back stood up. I say we let Camden run the board. Laughter rippled through the crowd, but a few people nodded seriously. I raised my hands. No thanks. I just want people to respect boundaries and the law. Later that week, I got a letter from the county. Valerie was being charged with 3 counts of fraud, unlawful use of private property, and impersonating a business official. The HOA's insurance was already scrambling to protect themselves from a class action lawsuit by the couples she duped. As for my dock, it's quiet again. No more folding chairs. No more mason jars or fake ivy. Just the sound of water lapping against the posts and the occasional heron swooping low. I installed a new lock and a motion-activated camera with a floodlight, just in case anyone else gets creative, but I doubt they will. Not after they saw Valerie scream all the way into the back of a squad car in front of 24 wedding guests. That image burned into this neighborhood's memory forever. 3 weeks after the wedding debacle, I came home to find a certified letter taped to my front door with 2 pieces of floral stationery duct taped underneath it. One was a handwritten apology from the ousted treasurer, and the other was a frantic letter from Valerie herself written in looping cursive, ranting about character assassination, deep state retaliation, and maritime entrapment. I stepped over it and didn't bother unlocking the door until I'd called the sheriff's office. Deputy Lanning confirmed what I suspected. Valerie had been released on bail and was being advised unsuccessfully to keep a low profile. Her lawyer had already filed a motion to suppress the security footage from my dock, claiming it violated her expectation of privacy. That got laughed out of court. Meanwhile, the HOA's interim board, now chaired by a retired judge named Alina Rusk, had started bringing in auditors. Alina was in her 70s, sharp as a blade, and not remotely interested in HOA politics until now. She greeted me on my front porch one evening, wearing a windbreaker and carrying a box of binders. "I need you to look at something," she said, setting the box down on my patio table. "We've got records going back 6 years. Some of it's nonsense, but there's a pattern." I flipped through the top folder. Rental agreements, deposit slips, and a spreadsheet labeled Lakeside Guest Events HOA sanctioned. Every entry had the same initials in the approval column, VM. Alina pulled out a manila envelope from the bottom of the box. "This one's different. It's not weddings. It's permits, fake ones, filed with the city under a shell LLC called Mayfield Ridge Historical Society. Ever heard of that?" "No," I said, "because it doesn't exist." "Exactly." She used it to push through landscaping projects, dock demolitions, and shoreline preservation efforts, all under the guise of historical conservation. Except none of it was filed with the State Archive Office, and the city's permitting office had no oversight. The signature on all the authorizations, Alina held up a photocopy, forged multiple times, including city officials' names. I sat back in my chair. That's not just fraud. That's document falsification on a municipal level. "She's in over her head, and she doesn't even realize it," Alina said. "But now we've got a real problem. The county prosecutor's office wants statements from homeowners whose property was listed in these projects. Your boathouse is in at least 3 of them." I spent the next 2 hours going through every instance my name or parcel number showed up. One was for a dock maintenance initiative that never happened. Another claimed my shoreline was part of a historical reenactment zone, whatever that meant. The most infuriating listed my boathouse as a community structure in disrepair, eligible for demolition and redevelopment. That explained the letter I got last fall warning me that non-compliant waterfront structures may be subject to removal. I dismissed it as generic HOA nonsense. Turns out, it was part of a larger push by Valerie to repurpose private spaces under a fake historical initiative. You realize this means she tried to set up a legal foundation to seize your property, Alina said quietly. I nodded. And she almost got away with it. The next morning, I met with Assistant District Attorney McClellan, an efficient woman with reading glasses on a chain and a legal pad filled with bullet points. She asked precise questions and barely looked up while taking notes. She forged documents to claim Camden's dock was a community structure, Alina explained. She used that to justify hosting events and collecting money, all without board approval or owner consent. McClellan tapped her pen. And these events generated income? Thousands, I said. Some couples paid cash, others used apps. All of it went directly to her. The HOA never saw a dime. McClellan flipped through her notes. We're preparing to add charges: criminal impersonation, forgery in the second degree, and unlawful real estate manipulation. If we can prove intent to defraud for land seizure, that brings in grand larceny. She's not going to take this quietly, I said. She doesn't have to, McClellan replied. The evidence will do the talking. That same week, a forensic accountant hired by Alina discovered that Valerie had also used HOA funds to hire a landscaping crew to clear a wooded lot behind her house land that was zoned as protected wetland. She billed it as firebreak maintenance, then tried to invoice the city for reimbursement under the fraudulent Historical Society name. The city's environmental division filed a separate complaint, and suddenly, Valerie was facing a second investigation, this one federal. Back at the neighborhood, things were tense. Several residents had started pulling out old notices, letters, and board memos, realizing they'd been manipulated into approving budget items that didn't exist. One family found out their backyard fence had been removed under the guise of historical visibility requirements. They were furious. Others started circulating a petition to dissolve the HOA entirely. I wasn't surprised when I got a knock on my door at 9 p.m. It was Valerie's husband, Alan, standing in the shadows of my porch light with his hands jammed into his pockets. She's not well, he said, eyes darting. She's convinced this is a conspiracy against her, thinks the neighborhood's been infiltrated by federal agents. I didn't respond. She's holed up in her sister's lake house 2 counties over, keeps calling lawyers. One of them finally dropped her after she accused him of being part of the scheme. This isn't a scheme, I said. This is accountability. Alan looked down at the porch boards. I just wanted you to know she's not planning to show up for her court date. That triggered an immediate call to the sheriff's office. Within 24 hours, a bench warrant was issued. Valerie was now officially a fugitive. 3 days later, she was caught trying to cross into Georgia in a rental car registered under her niece's name. She had dyed her hair rusty red and was wearing a sun hat 2 sizes too big. The arrest made the local news, and the footage of her flailing and screaming about deep water entrapment went viral. A week after that, the HOA meeting held in the community center was standing room only. Alina stood behind the podium with a single sheet of paper. Motion to formally dissolve the Lakeside Ridge Homeowners Association, she said. All in favor. Nearly every hand went up. The vote passed. With the HOA dissolved, all remaining funds were frozen pending civil litigation. The new neighborhood committee, voluntary and transparent, was formed with a rotating leadership schedule. I didn't join, but I offered to help review any future property disputes, just to keep things fair. As for my dock, I had it sealed off with a coded gate and a posted sign referencing private parcel law, complete with the county clerk's stamp. No one questioned it. People started waving again when they passed my house. A few even brought over homemade bread or asked about the repairs I'd made to the boathouse roof. I kept the new security system just in case, but I started sleeping with the windows open again. The lake was quiet, no music, no folding chairs, no floral arches, just water and wind. And the sound of a community finally waking up. It was mid-November when I got a call from Ada McClellan again. I was raking pine needles off my roof when she asked if I could come down to the courthouse the next morning. She didn't give details over the phone, but her tone said everything. By the time I arrived, the courtroom was already half full. There were news crews outside, 2 sketch artists seated up front, and a row of Valerie's former HOA board members sitting stiffly in the gallery. The bailiff nodded to me as I slid into a seat behind the prosecution's table. McClellan looked up from her notes. "We're moving forward with full charges: grand larceny, real estate fraud, impersonation of a public official, and obstruction. She's being arraigned today." I leaned in. "Anything else?" "Wire fraud," she said, tapping a folder. Turns out she submitted digital invoices for at least 5 of those events using a false tax ID. That pulled it into federal jurisdiction. Valerie was escorted in through the side door, ankles chained, wrists cuffed. Gone was the floral pantsuit and oversized jewelry. She wore a rumpled gray jumpsuit and looked like she hadn't touched a hairbrush in a week. Her eyes scanned the room as if searching for someone to blame. The judge, an older man with a clipped voice and no patience for theatrics, read the charges without ceremony. Valerie interrupted twice, insisting she was the true representative of Lakeside Ridge, and accused the court of colluding with rogue property owners. The judge cut her off both times. "You will have your opportunity to speak. Right now you will listen." McClellan presented a streamlined case summary: falsified documents, forged permits, unauthorized financial transactions, and misuse of private property for profit. She laid out the evidence like a surgeon with a scalpel, precise, clinical, and impossible to refute. Then came the witness statements. The groom from the wedding stood and testified about the thousands he and his wife paid for what they were told was a legal venue. A single mother described how Valerie forced her to remove a backyard playset under lakefront visibility regulations that didn't exist. A retiree on a fixed income explained how his dues increased inexplicably while his property was flagged for non-compliant shrubbery, a code Valerie invented. Then I was called. I walked to the witness stand, took an oath, and sat down. McClellan gestured toward the monitor. "This is Camden Thorne," she said, "the legal owner of the boathouse used in the unauthorized events." "Mr. Thorne," she began, "can you describe how you discovered your property was being used without consent?" I detailed the wedding, the chairs, the music, Valerie's clipboard, the fact that I'd returned home early and found strangers standing on my dock like it was a public venue. I explained the legal documents I provided, the footage from my security system, and the confrontation where Valerie claimed she had jurisdiction over the shoreline. "And did you ever give permission for your property to be used in any way by the HOA?" "Never," I said. "Not once," she nodded. "And to clarify, did you receive any compensation or communication regarding these events?" "No." I didn't even know they were happening until I found someone tossing rose petals into my koi pond. The defense attorney, a thin man with an expensive haircut and the look of someone who'd lost control of a fire, tried to paint me as uncooperative. He asked if I'd ever attended HOA meetings, if I'd had previous disputes with the board. "No," I said. "I was too busy working to think someone might fabricate a fake historical society to steal my dock." That got a few quiet laughs from the jury box. By the end of the day, the judge denied bail. The court finds the defendant poses a continued risk to community property and legal proceedings. Remanded to custody pending trial. Valerie shouted as they led her out. "They're all lying. This was a smear campaign orchestrated by the shoreline elite." That phrase made headlines the next day. Shoreline elite sabotage HOA visionary or just justice served. After the arraignment, I went out for lunch with Alina Rusk and a few of the neighbors who'd testified. We sat at a patio cafe overlooking the lake, the same water that had once hosted Valerie's illicit business. Alina sipped her tea. The city council's talking about new legislation, stronger oversight for HOAs, required audits, transparency clauses. About time, I said. Funny, said one of the neighbors, how one clipboard and a few fake permits nearly let her take over half the shoreline. She got greedy, Alina said. That's how these things always fall apart. She couldn't just have power. She had to profit from it. The trial date was set for early January. By then, the evidence had grown to fill 8 bankers' boxes. The forensic accountant had traced over $70,000 in misappropriated funds, plus nearly $20,000 in vendor kickbacks. At trial, Valerie's defense team tried a new angle: mental instability. They brought in a psychologist who claimed she suffered from delusional authority syndrome, a rare condition where individuals believe they wield more power than they actually do. The judge didn't buy it. Neither did the jury. After 6 days of testimony, the verdict came back: guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was swift. Valerie Mayfield was sentenced to 9 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 6. She was also ordered to pay restitution to each homeowner affected, including me. Her personal assets, 2 vehicles, a rental property, and a bank account under the name Lakeside Events Consulting were seized. The courtroom was silent as the judge gave her final warning. You abused your neighbor's trust, forged public records, and manipulated legal structures for personal gain. This was not a misunderstanding. This was calculated fraud. She was led out in cuffs again. This time, she didn't scream. A month later, I got a check in the mail from the restitution fund. It wasn't much, a few thousand, but it was symbolic. More importantly, the parcel records were updated with a formal note from the county clerk. Privately owned structure. Not subject to HOA jurisdiction. Alina retired from the interim committee, and the neighborhood voted to keep the voluntary council system. No dues, no fines. Just a group of neighbors who met once a month to discuss shared concerns and swap gardening tips. On the first anniversary of the wedding incident, someone left a miniature folding chair on my dock with a note that said, "Reserved for justice." I kept it. The dock is mine again, completely. No one touches it without permission. The floodlight still kicks on when someone crosses the invisible boundary, but it hasn't had to shine since the arrest. The lake is quiet. Not silent, just peaceful. The kind of quiet that comes when people finally stop looking over their shoulders. And sometimes, when the breeze is just right, I swear I can still hear Valerie yelling about conspiracy and shoreline elites, faint and distant, like a bad echo finally fading away.